Croeso i'r ail o'r webinarau dyn ni fel Hybu Cymru yn mynd i dala dros yr haf. Heno, dyn ni'n mynd i edrych ar ffrwythlondeb yn y diadell, a dyn ni gyda milfeddyg Tom Searle a'r arbenigwr Kate Hovers yn siarad amdano pethau dylwn ni fod yn edrych amdano ar y ffarm ynglyn â ffrwythlondeb yn diadell. Welcome to the second of HCC's webinars that will be held over the summer. Tonight we're going to be looking at sheep fertility, and we've got the veterinary surgeon Tom Searle and also sheep specialist Kate Hovers talking to us about the main considerations to look at when we're talking about sheep fertility. At the end of the webinar there'll be an opportunity to ask for a question and answer session with the two speakers. Diolch yn fawr.
Hello, my name's Kate Hovers and I'm talking today about caring for rams in the important run-up to topping. The rams are half the flock, and while we should obviously be looking after them all year round, now is the time to be giving them some extra attention to make sure they're fit and fertile for topping time. It takes 6 to 8 weeks to make healthy sperm, so 8 to 10 weeks, 10 weeks is an ideal time to give them some extra attention and care. And here we've got a picture of our rams at home shortly after shearing, checking them out, and then we could decide what grazing they're going on to. Rams want to be in good condition for topping, body condition score about 3.5, but not overfat, and ideally they're in condition off grass with a minimum amount of concentrates, or hopefully just off grass. This is an interesting slide just to show you that there is some research behind what you might hear often, that overfat rams don't work very well, or you bought a ram that was stuffed on buckets and didn't do as well. Now this was a small study, but 16 Dorper, I know that's not a UK breed, but it's not breed specific. So 16 were put onto nice grazing with a mineral bucket, and the other 16 were given ad lib concentrates feed. And after 7 weeks, we can show the effect of overfeeding on the amount of fat in the scrotum. They were both producing semen and sperm, but the ad lib concentrate group had less semen and it was less active, and so those rams were less fertile. So ideally, condition score between 3 and 4. Once we get over 4, they're too fat. Under 3, they're a bit too lean, because we want our rams to work hard and they will lose some condition over topping time. So what are we going to do at the check over 8-10 weeks or so pre-topping? Well, toes, teeth, testicles and treatments. You might have heard that talked about before. Starting off, a lame ram is obviously not going to work as well, so making sure they're fit. Treat anything that needs treating so they're upright and on 4 legs for topping time. And you've probably seen the 5-point plan, hopefully putting that in place on your farm. The sheep on the left, if that was a ram, I think we could all agree that's not going to work very well. You've got time to use any antibiotic injections as prescribed by your vet if they've got any issues. And also, if you're using foot rot vaccination, sort of 8 weeks before topping is a good time to give to the rams. You don't want to be doing anything stressful in the run up to topping, in that time when we hope they're making healthy, effective sperm. So avoiding vaccinations, major management changes, avoid feed changes in the 2 months before topping. Teeth. Well, certainly if you're breeding your own ewe lamb replacements, you want to have rams with good mouths. There is a genetic component, so they want to retain their teeth well, not be too long, not under or overshot. And also commercial rams, well, any rams, you want them to live for several years, so that's effect on the value of them, and they need to be able to eat well. Testicles, an examination, a physical examination now, and Tom Searle, colleague of mine from South Wales, is going to be talking about that in a video later. And he will talk about measuring, just to say the size matters, the rule of thumb, 30 centimetres scrotal circumference for a ram lamb, 32 for a yearling, and 36 for a mature. Thinking about treatments, do your rams need worming? Do they need a fluke treatment? Most of your ewes probably won't need worming. Fit ewes have an age-related immunity. You may need to worm some poorer ewes or younger ones. Rams, there is some evidence that they might be more likely to need worming. We're not sure whether this is due to different management or that the males have a less robust age-related immunity than females, but it's certainly a good idea to take some fecal samples for a worm egg count. A composite one is fine, where you pick up the same amount from a number of different samples, so from a number of different rams, and submit it for a group average. But if you have got 1 or 2 rams in poorer condition, it may be worth doing an individual worm count. Fluke treatment, when they need it, same as the ewes, that, well, the whole flock is very individual to farm. Whereas last year, 2018, was a lower fluke risk, and this year is low so far. There will be farms that still have a higher fluke risk and will need an early autumn treatment. Others may not need a treatment until later in the winter. So doing some testing and having that as part of your health plan. Vaccinations, hopefully nobody's forgotten to have their rams as covered for Clostridia and maybe Pasteurella, and part of the routine vaccinations of the flock. A booster pre-topping can be useful to rams so that their clostridial protection is as high as possible, as they are a little bit at risk if they start fighting and jostling, as bruised tissue is an ideal area for Clostridia to breed in and cause blackleg. And the last thing we want is a ram dying of blackleg just before you turn him out or just after he's been turned out. Other management things, if you are on a farm that is known trace element deficient, then now is the time to supplement the rams as well. If you don't know, then maybe think about sampling. Trace elements have an effect on fertility, but we don't want to over supplement, and they may or may not be required. Now, many of you will be buying in rams, so biosecurity, also causing disease prevention, thinking about what can we buy in. Now, if we were doing this in a group, I'd be asking you to shout out various things, but really there's a long list of diseases, parasites and diseases that you could be buying in with any sheep. So we've got worms that may or may not be resistant to some of the drenches that you use, fluke, which may or may not be resistant to some of the products, ectoparasites, lice and scab. Scab may or may not be resistant to the injectables. Foot rot, cod. If you haven't got cod, you certainly don't want to bring it in. And even if you've got foot rot, there are 10 strains in the UK. Ovine infectious keratoconjunctivitis, pink eye problems. Not a fatal disease. Economic costs are mainly in treatment, difficult to eradicate from a flock, and when it first comes in, an awful lot of treatment and time and effort is needed. Then we've got ORF, another disease if you haven't got, you don't want to buy in and you can get carrier sheep. And then we've got what we call the iceberg diseases, Mydevisna, CLA, OPA, Johnes, border disease. We call them icebergs because we diagnose a small amount, although increasing in some of them over the UK, but there's a huge amount of disease underneath the surface. And testing isn't always easy or straightforward. Mydevisna has been considered a little bit of a disease you need to test your sheep for to go to shows or sell certain pedigrees. It's certainly a disease that is causing huge economic issues on a number of commercial farms now, and unfortunately tend not to diagnose it until a large proportion of the flock is infected. So what should you be doing with animals you've brought in? Certainly they should go into some kind of isolation. Doesn't have to be inside, but if they're outside, ideally double fence so they can't come nose to your own sheep. Keeping them separate as long as possible. We do have all our breeding animal sales just at the time of year that we want to be using them, and that can make it difficult to have a proper 4-6 week of isolation, but the longer the better. Things like low levels of sheep scab or lice may become evident during your period of isolation, and then you can treat a small number of sheep rather than your whole flock. Treating for worms to avoid bringing in resistant parasites, so using the 4th or 5th group products, which is Zolvix or Startec, and also thinking about fluke treatments. With fluke, you need to be thinking about whether those sheep are bringing in fluke that could infect yours if you're a low risk. Also thinking about protecting those from fluke on your farm. Also observing them for lameness, treating as appropriate. Ideally, asking some health information from wherever you're buying. If you're buying straight from farm, that's a bit easier. But if buying from sales, we do see increasing amounts of health information about the vaccinations that animals have, and also to ask about worming policy and whether they're in any accreditation scheme. It is possible to test for a number of diseases. Some of the iceberg diseases like Mydevisna, there's a very effective test. Johnes, CLA, the test is less specific, but it still can be worth testing, particularly if you're just buying a small number of individuals. So that is something to discuss with your vet and have as part of your buying in policy and part of your biosecurity policy. So in summary, I've really just very briefly gone through what to look at for your rams, reminding you to check them well before the breeding season so that they're fit and healthy, doing a fertility examination, which Tom is going to talk about, making sure they're included in routine vaccinations and treatments, asking some health information about anything you buy in, and isolating, giving some routine treatments, and consider testing your new purchases, and include all of that in part of your active health plan, which any of you who are on the Stoc Plus project, this is certainly something to discuss with your vet as part of that. Thank you.
Hi, it's Tom Searle from South Wales Farm Vets, and today I'm at Hendry van Gorchwam, helping with the Ram Compare project. Now, the Ram Compare project is comparing different breeds of rams, looking at genetics, genetic potential, and then comparing that between the breeds and between the genetics of those animals, whether one animal comes out on top with all manner of things, looking at lamb daily live weight gain, potential things like fertility and general health. So I'm going to be helping out the Ram Compare project today by doing a number of different things. All of the rams involved will have a full fertility examination, including a physical exam and semen analysis. All of the rams will also have a blood sample looking for common infectious diseases such as Midivisna, Johne's and CLA to prevent these coming into the flock. They will also be receiving quarantine treatments to cover them for worms, fluke and scab. So interestingly, 60% of rams will fail a fertility examination based on the physical exam alone. When carrying out a physical exam on a ram, I start at the head end. I examine the teeth to 1, check the age of the ram, and 2, to ensure that there is a good bite between the incisors and the hard palate. This is important because this can be passed on to the lambs, and we do not want overshot or undershot lambs because that may affect their ability to graze. I will then check the eyes and check for any signs of previous damage, for example from an infectious disease such as New Forest or silage eye, and make sure that the animal has good sight. Personally I then go on to a chest examination where I listen to the heart and check for any murmurs. I will then body condition score the ram, and I want the ram to be fit, not fat, so depending on breed that's a body condition score between 3 and 4. Why I don't want them to be any higher than that and I don't want them to be fat is because they are more likely to be laying fat within the testicles, and fat within the testicles will mean that they're at a higher temperature and affect fertility. I will then move on to checking the testicles, and I will be palpating them to make sure that they are firm, and I want them to be the same tone as that of a tensed bicep. I will also be checking them for any lumps and bumps and do a scrotal circumference measurement. The ram will also be tipped. This allows us to extrude the penis to check that for any signs of damage or trauma or infection. Allow us to have a look at the brisket to make sure there's no abscessation or any sores or anything there. And then have a good examination of all of the feet, checking for infectious diseases and any conformational abnormalities. So that is the physical exam complete, and it is something you can easily replicate at home to give you confidence in the rams that you already have, and also to be able to check rams that you may buy in the future. I will also carry out a semen analysis, and I take the semen sample through electroejaculation. I initially examine it to check for the colour and the consistency, and then I will look at it in more detail by looking at it underneath the microscope. First of all, I assess the gross motility, which looks at the forward motion and the general motion of all of the semen there, and that also is a good assessment for concentration. I will then dilute the sample down and assess individual sperm and checking that all of them, or the majority of them, are swimming in a forward motion. Finally, I may stain the sample to assess the live to dead ratio and check for any abnormalities within the sperm, such as extra heads or changes within the tail. So that is a breeding examination done within the ram, and I think personally that all rams should be at least physically examined every year, 6 weeks before they go in with the ewes. And if you are single sire mating, then I think that ram should have a full fertility examination, including semen analysis, done by your vet.
Noswaith a croeso I sesiwn cwestiwn ag ateb gyda ni a siaradwyr nawr am y noswaith sef Tom Searle a Kate Hovers. Fel rydym wedi clywed yn barod heno, ffrwythlondeb un o'r pethau bwysica yn y diadell o ran effeithronnwydd y system, a nawr dyn ni gyda cyfle fyddwn ni gofyn cwpl o gwestiynau i'r doi milfeddyg sef Kate a Tom. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. We now have a session, a question and answer session with our two guest speakers, Tom Searle and Kate Hovers. And now we have an opportunity to ask any questions that you have on kind of ram fertility or also flock fertility when it comes to the sheep as well. So if you have any questions, if you can put them into the comments at the bottom of the Facebook page, then we'll take those as the night goes. And what we're going to do now is host a 15 to 20 minute question and answer session. So if you have any questions, now's a great time to have some free vet advice. we'll start off, and thank you both. Thank you both for your time and also for the informative videos. Tom, we'll start with you now, and what we want to do is, obviously we're coming up to topping ram sales season, and what we're just wondering is, what are the key considerations that should be looked at now? Because there's obviously, this year is very different with COVID, so there's going to be on-farm sales and also probably private sales as well, together with the usual livestock market sales. But what would be the key considerations you'd say to your farmers when they are now looking for rams?
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Good question. I think for me, I'm going to look at that in two ways. Way number one, if you're buying off farm, get to know the farm history a little bit more. Get to know what diseases they may have had, what things they may be vaccinating against, any treatments that these rams may have had, sort of worming and food protocols and vaccinations. And then see if you can get used to their feeding regime and how they've been looking after these tups to get them to the point of sale. There's nothing worse than buying a tup that looks absolutely fantastic, but it's been given a lot of cake in the shed, and then you take it out and turn it out on the hill. It's just got grass in front of it and it starts to melt in front of you. A second thing, especially if you're buying at sales and markets, don't be afraid of getting into that pen. Get in and get your hands on that sheep. You want to almost kick a few tires if you're buying a car. Have a good feel of those teeth, check the feet, make sure it's on all four legs, and really check those testicles. Ultimately, nice and even size, like a firm bicep, and bigger is genuinely better.
Kate, we've got a question here for you as far as, this is quite a common thing that we hear about, is a ram's been looking good all season. It's been looking fit and fertile, and then a couple of weeks before going into the ewes, or a month before going into ewes, you start seeing it holding one leg and walking around a bit gingerly. Now, there's two trains of thought. Some will turn around and say you leave it, but what would be the proper vet advice on something like that?
Noswaith and hello everybody. I would say you need to treat it as soon as possible. There's a bit of an old, I don't know why they call it old wise, but one of these tales that say antibiotics affect fertility. Well, there are very few antibiotics. There are some that do, but they're not used in sheep medicine anyway. The things that will affect fertility, pain, stress, running a temperature, lameness will infect fertility. So the sooner you catch that ram and give him an injection of antibiotics and spray all 4 feet, the less bad effect it will have on his fertility. So get out in the field and check them and get them in if they need treating.
Good. And Tom, when we're talking about treating rams and also fertility, you showed us a video there out at Henry Van Gogh, who's doing a ram compare project for us. We saw you there going through the motions. By the way, you were moving very quickly in the fast forward version there. So I was just wondering, and one of the questions is asked, if we were to get vets out to us on farm, how long would a fertility test take from start to finish on a ram? Is it an all morning job, or how long would you spend?
Okay, so it's a relatively quick and easy job. The majority of the time at the start is setting everything up. And as you can see, there's a fair amount of gear with the microscope and everything there. So as long as we've got power and somewhere safe to put that microscope, we don't need any electricity alongside the ram. It's all battery operated. So I normally budget about 20 minutes, including setup for my first ram. And then once we get going and everything's sort of nicely set up and we're used to all handling and what our little jobs would be to get the thing done, 5-10 minutes a ram.
And how soon after doing the test would you expect to have a result to be able to tell your farmer yes or no?
So interestingly, about 60% of the rams that fail a fertility exam fail on the physical exam alone. So that obviously you can say completely at the time. I mean, if the testicles are too small, that's your answer then and there. Once we get the semen sample, I look at it underneath the microscope on farm, so next to the ram, and I can assess the motility and the gross motility and the individual sperm motility, and I can give you an answer then and there. I will, in a lot of cases, stain that semen, and I will look at it back at the lab in a bit more detail, but in my experience, very few rams fail on that extra staining. So normally all the results we get ram side on farm on the day are relevant, and we can give you that information then and there.
And Kate, as part of your work, you're obviously a practicing vet as well, but you also train vets. How many of our vets now in Wales would be able and willing to do fertility tests on rams, or is it only a specialist number that we have got?
No, I would say about 20 years there were probably fewer of us doing it, but these days the vast majority of sheep and beef practices will be doing fertility examinations. So yeah.
So the skill set,
not all, but many.
So the skill set is there. As an industry, we need to be using that and utilising it.
Using it. Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Tom, in your practice, are you seeing more farmers ask for fertility testing?
Definitely. I trained myself up in it. I went on the courses and everything about 5 years ago, and before then we were shipping out a lot of that work, and now we've just seen it grow and grow and grow, both on the bulls and on the rams. And what I've really enjoyed is that there's been a lot of almost repeat clients that year on year on year, once you found that dodgy tup, that subfertile animal or an infertile animal, they come back. They realise the benefit that will have upon them.
Yeah, and a lot of the work associated with this, and one of the reasons is obviously to get the ewes in lamb, but also about having a condensed lambing period, because that's my understanding is the amount of infertile lambs is quite small. They tend to be subfertile, which drags out the lambing period. And this kind of brings us into the next question, which is about teaser rams. Obviously teaser rams are becoming more popular now as people try to make that lambing period shorter. But if you were to vasectomize your ram now, or pick some animal or pick some ram lambs to vasectomize, when would be the right time of year to do it? And how is it almost too late for this season now? Tom, we'll take your.
Okay, my thoughts. You want to be doing it now. You may have left it slightly late. Depends when your tups are going to go in. Sperm can still be viable in a vasectomized ram for a few weeks, 6 weeks after they've been produced, and obviously you need them time to heal after that procedure as well. And they need to be going in a couple of weeks before your rams normally do. So it depends how your timing is. I would hate for someone to ring me up and say, I want a vasectomized ram, he's got to go in next week, and you do it today, because there's a chance he could still work.
Yeah, and that would be a disaster really in that stage. Kate, would you agree with Tom's assessment on that?
Yes, definitely I would. And there's always some debate about whether to vasectomise ram lambs or yearlings. There's a thought that it may be better to do yearlings because they're more mature, but they do develop. Otherwise, at home I've vasectomised ram lambs reasonably regularly that have worked very well as teasers, but it needs to be a mature-ish ram lamb. And in fact, as you say, I've got one. We don't have one at the moment. I've got one at home to do this week, but our rams don't go out till the 5th of November, so I haven't left it too late. But yes, yeah, I'd agree entirely. Occasionally, I mean, certainly they always need a fortnight to recover from surgery, but occasionally if someone's left it a bit late, so the ram's been vasectomised, he is a teaser, but we think but it's a bit close, so we might still have some fertile sperm stored, where you can then put him with either sponge a ewe to let him serve a ewe, or put him with just a few ewes to serve a few ewes and use up all his reserves before you put him out with the flock a couple of weeks later in an emergency, but ideally just do them well in time.
We spent a lot of time tonight talking about rams and ram fertility. Obviously, that's 50% of your flock. There's the ewes as well to worry about, and obviously that's almost a subject in itself and a total presentation for a different night maybe. But we talked about the key considerations with the rams. question for the two of you, and Tom, we go first. But what would be your key considerations when looking at the breeding ewes, and what to consider when looking at fertility within the flock?
So I'm going to steal this off Kate. Body condition score is key. That's the one thing you take home for your ewe fertility, is getting that body condition score right. And as Kate, I'm sure she'll explain, there's a whole manner of things that can affect that body condition score on a flock level and an individual level. So looking into those as well.
Kate, have you?
Yep, I absolutely agree. And ewes want to be in body condition sort of 3 to 3.5. If they get over fat, then fertility goes down again. But over fat is really over 4, which is fat. There's work done on lots of different breeds, and reliably, if you have ewes about body condition 2.5 in a whole variety of breeds all around the world, and you increase their average body condition to 3.5, you increase your scanning percent by about 20%, which is an awful lot of lambs. Okay, you've got to get them born and rear them, but that has the biggest effect. There's a lot of things that can affect body condition, and if you've got the whole flock are a bit lean, you're probably looking at nutrition and looking at your grassland management. You may be looking at parasite control, particularly if you're in a fluky area. If you've got smaller groups, it can be individual health. Lameness will have an effect, bad teeth or back teeth. And if you've got sort of smaller groups of younger ewes in poorer condition, then you might start to want looking for what we call the iceberg diseases, the range of diseases that will just affect body condition. And we tend not to pick them up in a flock until they're quite extensive, and it's really difficult to know which way to go and how to get rid of them then. And trace elements also have an effect on fertility as well, but you need to know whether you're lacking in anything. Supplement it a month or so before topping, but don't give things that aren't needed. Know your status, do some testing really.
And when we talk about making sure things are in right condition, we've always said that prevention is better than cure, and that's why we kind of encourage vaccinations. But what would be the advice as far as vaccinating rams? How, when you think about stuff like foot vax, etc., how long or how soon before the rams can go into the ewes would you be looking to give that last vaccination to give yourself that safe breathing room to make sure the ram's working when it goes into the ewes? Tom?
So I really wouldn't want to be giving anything that might spike a temperature in a ram, which some of these vaccines will. Any closer really than 8 weeks before they're going to go in, because the sperm cycle, anything that spikes a temperature while that sperm is being produced, that sperm is being used in about 6 to 8 weeks time. So we don't want to influence that in any way. I mean, again, you don't want that ram to go lame, so you can, and I would recommend foot vaxing rams, but making sure you do it in very good time.
So you're getting close to that point now, where it's the cut-off point for this year for many flocks, really.
Yeah. So, and again, at the end of the day, everything's preparation, isn't it? Yeah. I always think it's very funny that this is the time of year that everyone goes and buys all their abortion vaccinations. It's like a mad rush, but you can do it pretty earlier in the year if you've decided which lambs you're keeping as replacements and all that sort of thing. So it doesn't have to be 4 weeks before, it can be quite a few weeks before.
And Kate, when we're talking about ewe lambs, there's a question coming about is fertility hereditary? This is all about trying to get as many lambs as we possibly can from our flock. And when we're getting into that stage now, as Tom mentions, people are looking for the ewe lambs and picking their ewe lambs. Is fertility hereditary? And by picking ewes that are twins, are you increasing the chance of twins in the future within your flock?
To a degree, there is a hereditary part. Fertility is hereditary. There is a hereditary part related to both the male and the female side. Generally, I would say if you've got issues with fertility, look at your ram power, at getting your rams fit and fertile and the body condition and everything in your ewes right first. That will have a major effect across the flock. But yes, there is a place for keeping, once you've got everything right, keeping more twins on than singles as well. There is a definite hereditary component.
And Tom, a question that's come in from an earlier Kate answer is about ewe condition and about, you know, if you've got ewes in a body condition score of 2 or 2.5, you know, how long will it take, or what do you need to do in order to increase that to get it up to that 3.5 body condition score that we are looking for?
So you want to be looking at that rising plane of nutrition. So if you've got better lays, better ground that you can utilize in that period, if that's not really available to you, you can feed a gradual increase of concentrate in the field, obviously bringing in cost effectiveness of that. But if you can utilize pasture for the use at this point, it's where you want to be putting it. I mean, for me, earlier in the season, you want to be utilizing that good pasture for the lambs to get those lambs grown and get them gone, and then saving good pasture. Then now is when you want to be putting it to use to get ready for next year's lamb crop.
Start pre-planning, as you say, and getting ready for next year already.
Oh yeah.
Tom, one of the last questions I've got is about your, you know, we see that you're very active on social media, and you know, you're one of a wave of new vets that we've got that are doing a lot on social media, and we see you on Instagram with your page. Do you see that as the way forward for the sector, really, or for the veterinary world, and to give advice out to customers in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good way of getting information out there to other vets. I mean, I'm actually communicating on it to vets across the world, and I'm finding out, you know, what they're doing in Australia, New Zealand, America, what their little ideas, little tips and things like that. And we can then pass that on to our clients. And I definitely get asked on it, and people follow me from different farmers across the country and around the world. So we're all kind of feeding each other information. And then I think it's really good for people who aren't in the agricultural industry in any way to see what we get up to, and to see our passion, and to see our care of what we do to put into these animals and to produce these great products. I think it's a fantastic platform to just show everything and get a bit of an insight into other people's worlds.
No, very good. And Kate, how long before we see you on Instagram and putting up these videos?
No, I do use Facebook, and I use it work-wise, but I don't think you'll see me on Instagram and others. There's just not time in my life. I'm at the opposite end of my career from Tom. So I'd rather go running in the mountains than be playing with my phone or my iPad. Okay. But yeah, it is the future, maybe. No. Yeah.
And you know, and we see it, and you know, we encourage and approach it. You know, the way you're doing it, Tom, you're putting information out all the time, and it's instant, isn't it? It's instant information, which people are looking for, and it's very effective. That kind of brings us to the end now. So thank you all for listening. Thank you to Tom, and thank you to Kate for your time tonight. Very informative, as we expected. But thank you all for your information. As mentioned earlier, this is the second of our summer webinars that we will be hosting as HCC. Tom here is one of our vets on the Stoc Plus project, which is our red meat development project that we're running. And you know, what the project's about is about proactive animal health planning, and it links in a lot with what we're discussing now, that firefighting or coming in to solve a problem is much harder than actually identifying where there could be problems and putting steps in place to avoid those. And that's one of the key elements that we're doing through Stoc Plus. So as you say, these webinars will be held every fortnight from now on, and the next webinar will be held in a fortnight's time, and it's with Professor Diane Williams, who's going to be discussing some of the liver fluke research that we've funded through HCC at University of Liverpool. So diolch yn fawr I chi gyd. Thank you all tonight. If you've got any questions, or if you have any questions for us after watching the video, please send them on, and we'll forward them to our vets and come back to you with a response. Oni bai hwnna, diolch yn fawr bawb. Thank you for watching.
Hi guys.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye all.